Governments issuing orders to shelter in place and restricting movement, the continued threat of both domestic and foreign terrorism when a nation is caught in the vice grip of a pandemic, nuclear dirty bombs in rogue nations, cyber warfare forcing a grid down or financial collapse, and artificial intelligence rendering human thought irrelevant to its calculations are all threats to our future society. They're man-made threats that increase in their catastrophic effects because of the already omnipresent threat we're realizing of the pandemic. Is an apocalyptic end of days merely a combination of threats we should already be aware of and working as a global society to eliminate? Barring global cooperation and what seems like an uncontrollable slide into further decay, how can we prepare to survive and thrive in a post-man-made catastrophe world? In part one of this two-part video series, we currently looked at disasters that are likely to occur naturally because we live on this planet. Threats like hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, and pandemics are catastrophes that happen naturally, and we can't prevent or avoid them. We also included natural threats that may be intensified because of humans, like climate change and food shortages. The last threat discussed in part one was civil unrest and civil war, which introduced you to man-made threats. These man-made threats are the items we'll discuss for part two of this video series. We'll look at the probable man-made threats that we possibly face in the immediate future. Knowing these probable disasters will help us greatly in our preparation. We will know what we will need to prepare for and what priorities we need to focus on to increase our odds of survival. So let's continue with the next point in this 10-part series. Number 6, government overreach. One of the main roles of democratic governments is to protect their citizens at all times. We talked about civil unrest in part 1 and how a government's natural response to curb it is declaring martial law. Though that response might, under some circumstances, be necessary, some governments tend to overreach their authority and implement draconian policies for the sake of, quote-unquote, protecting its citizens. This is not unusual, and the world's history has many examples of government overreach. One example is the USA's Patriot Act, which expanded the government's ability to invade privacy, override due process, and punish dissent as a response following the 9/11 attacks. But the supposed temporary measure is still largely in effect to this day, almost 2 decades after that terrorist attack. This coronavirus pandemic is raising concerns about government overreach. An article from Public Radio International said that under such circumstances, history has shown that there's a very fine line between protecting its citizens and eroding their civil rights, and that line can be exploited in times of great uncertainty. One example in the article is written when the Prime Minister of Israel ordered the country's security service to use cell phone data to identify citizens that need to be quarantined. Mass surveillance is being proposed and implemented in many countries to track and identify infected people. In March of 2020, the U.S. government sought the help of tech giants in Silicon Valley, including Facebook, Microsoft, Cisco, Twitter, and IBM. The government asked for assistance in tracking the outbreak and to prevent the dissemination of false information. The White House wanted assistance to stop the spread of conspiracy theories and harmful hoaxes by obtaining intelligence on citizens before potential hoaxes went viral. Though it's important to keep track of the virus to stop it from spreading and keeping misinformation in check, this is still a bit concerning since it gives the government an ability to censor and control information, misinformation, and propaganda. Many experts believe that implementing stricter policies during a pandemic are necessary. And this is especially true if citizens are too stubborn to follow even basic precautionary protocols. However, there should still be a fine line between what's appropriate and what's overreaching. In some ways, when the citizens protest against even basic government measures or spreads willingly or unwillingly conspiracy theories, they open the door for governments to step in and regulate the masses further. This always leads to government overreach. This threatens your security as a government's attempt to minimize the threat of its own citizenry. Number 7, terrorism. Terrorism is another man-made threat that we're probably going to face in the immediate future. But this threat is not new. Terrorism has been a problem for our society for hundreds of years. From the Guy Fawkes gunpowder plot of 1605 to Carlos Jackal to the atrocities of 9/11 and the Boston bombing, the world has frequently suffered at the hands of those who would desire to inflict terror on an innocent population, and this is going to continue. Aside from lives lost, terrorist attacks also bring the possibility of government overreach. As previously discussed, the USA Patriot Act was a result of the 9/11 attacks. Terrorists could also cause more damage if they were to target critical areas like our power grids and food supplies. This could compound the threat further, resulting in a higher and more prolonged death toll. With terrorism likely to continue being a threat to us, just knowing it's going to be a continuous problem is really not enough. We need to have a plan to ensure our survival. The National Center for Disaster Preparedness conducted a series of studies that showed that 72% of Americans are anticipating future terror attacks. However, less than 50% of those have an emergency plan for themselves and their families. After terrorist attacks like 9/11 and the Boston bombings, people are often left wondering what they can do to keep their families safe. One of the main things you can do is to work together with your community. An article from the Metropolitan Police in the UK said that communities defeat terrorism. This means being vigilant in your neighborhood and reporting any suspicious activities or things out of the ordinary that you hear or see can help keep you safe. People in stationary vehicles keeping an eye on a building or a structure, people using recording equipment, including camera phones, and seen making notes or sketches of security details, or someone who is suspiciously paying close attention to specific entry and exit points, stairwells, hallways, or fire escapes could all be plans for future terrorist attacks. You should also know what your community's emergency plans are in case a terrorist attack happens. You should have an emergency communication plan with a relative or friend who lives far from your area so they won't be affected by the same disastrous event. You also need to establish a meeting place for you and your family in case you're all separated and rendezvousing at home isn't a possibility. Plan multiple escape routes out of your urban environment should you need to escape your location. Find a place that is safe and be prepared to bug out to a rural location or to shelter in place. Number 8, nuclear. In the nuclear age, the threat of nuclear war or nuclear bombs will always be present. Even if countries are hesitant to use their nuclear arsenal because of the mutually assured destruction theory and the automation of nuclear counterstrikes, their nuclear arsenal can still be a problem if the country falls apart or they become overly corrupt or autocratic. Collapsing countries are also at risk of losing their nuclear inventory, and criminals might take advantage of the situation and steal nuclear weapons for use or resale. Aside from nuclear weapons, we're also in danger of dirty bombs. These are man-made bombs that combine conventional explosives like dynamite with radioactive materials. Now, they're not as destructive as actual nuclear weapons, but they're very disruptive, especially if you consider their psychological impact once it detonates. If dirty bombs were used to take down the World Trade Centers during the 9/11 attack, it would have killed thousands, and the dust smoke that engulfed the surrounding area would have been radioactive, affecting many more Americans for years into the future. While the radioactive poisoning won't kill immediately, it can cause long-term health risks like cancer. The cost would have also been more devastating since it would have had to include cleaning up the radioactive materials. The infected area could also be uninhabitable for decades. Though a dirty bomb can be disruptive, it doesn't mean that there is nothing you can do to prepare for it. According to an article from Slate, one of the crucial things you need to do is make sure you don't panic. The chances of being exposed to a harmful dose of radioactive substances are very slim, even in the worst case scenarios, if you remain calm. Panicking during this period will only make the situation worse. If you find yourself within the vicinity or the immediate path of dust clouds from the explosion, stay indoors and close off windows and turn off air conditioners and cover ventilation systems. If you happen to get exposed, take a shower and safely dispose of your clothes and shoes. It's also crucial to have a battery-powered radio that you can use to listen for updates. You also need to know where the shelters are in your area. You never know when you need to evacuate your home and go to a shelter, so knowing ahead of time where it is will likely be critical. Again, you should prepare in advance a bug-out bag for you and your family. As mentioned earlier, know all the possible escape routes you can go to in case there's a blockage or if one route is unpassable. A physical paper map of your area and a compass will also be helpful in case you get lost. Number 9, cyber warfare. Another threat we're likely going to face in the immediate future is cyber warfare. This doesn't seem like much of an immediate problem since not having access to the internet may not seem too bad, or getting individual credit cards hacked is more of an individual problem and a nuisance. But cyber warfare is not just about losing internet connection or getting credit card information stolen. One form of dangerous cyber warfare is using malicious software to destroy critical infrastructure or even nuclear processes. Hackers infiltrating a system can remain undiscovered by launching their malicious code in critical computer systems. Stuxnet was one such example in nuclear fuel refining centrifuge systems. The code was designed to sabotage the centrifuge refining of uranium while showing normal operating conditions to the facility monitors. It has since been proven that Chernobyl, an explosion at a nuclear power plant over 30 years ago that has left large swaths of land uninhabitable to this day, was a result of one simple miscalculation in process in the plant's operation. Another form of cyber warfare is the dedicated denial of service, or DDoS attack. In this type of attack, hackers overload and overwhelm a server so it won't be able to process legitimate requests. A DDoS attack on our grid could create blackouts across the country and easily launch the country into chaos. I did an in-depth video on how cyber attacks can bring our nation to its knees. I also provided some tips on what you can do to prepare should these events happen. I'll post a link to the video in the description section, also in the cards above if you want to check that out. And lastly, number 10, artificial intelligence. The last threat of our top 10 is often viewed as a future existential threat. However, this doesn't mean that we should not learn about it and prepare. This threat is artificial intelligence, or AI. As technology continues to advance at a rapid pace, more and more businesses are leaning towards automation. This means that they are leaving certain functions and responsibilities in the hands of artificial intelligence. One example is self-driving vehicles. Facebook is already using AI as it ranks and censors posts. So how is this really a threat to us? An article from The Conversation describes AI as something that is especially good at any task that requires an enormous amount of repetitive processing. Now, if this sounds like the jobs you're currently doing, then you should make preparations, since AI could start performing your responsibilities. Relying too much on AI is also dangerous, since its programming is only as flawless as the people who programmed it. But AI presents a far greater threat than just our livelihoods, with the danger of over-reliance. One of the greatest threats that world-renowned billionaire and serial entrepreneur Elon Musk fears is artificial intelligence. The danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads, Musk warned. He fears digital superintelligence, which is when AI possesses intelligence that far surpasses that of the brightest and most gifted human minds, thinks without the controls and constraints of humans. Many experts in the field dismiss Musk's fear, but he argues that it's fundamentally flawed to think there won't be an AI that's going to be smarter than any person on this planet. The issue with this is, can the smartest machine be controlled? As late astrophysicist Stephen Hawking said, one can imagine such technology outsmarting financial markets, out-inventing human researchers, out-manipulating human leaders, and developing weapons we cannot even understand. Whereas the short-term impact of AI depends on who controls it, the long-term impact depends on whether it can be controlled at all. Now, this might all sound far-fetched, but as AI continues to improve and develop at a rapid pace, it's not hard to imagine digital superintelligence happening sometime soon. One of the leading minds already view it as a threat, and that should be good enough for us to consider as well. Many things that appear in movies become the horrors of the future. Is it unreasonable to think a Terminator movie Skynet may be in our future? But there are ways to prepare against AI. Realize that every skill you have, from baking to gardening to building water purification systems, builds your skill sets against AI and increases your chances of survival should AI make a decision without calculating your life into it. As we conclude this two-part video series, we tackle the man-made threats that we're likely to face in the immediate future, starting with the government overreach, which is something that is already happening in many parts of the world, including the United States, due to the coronavirus pandemic. As governments grapple to contain the virus, they have implemented drastic measures that hamper certain liberties and freedoms that people enjoy. Though they claim it is for the greater good, there's a fine line between protecting citizens and eroding civil rights. The second threat, terrorism, will likely continue to be an issue, and we must always be prepared for it. Another disaster that we need to prepare for is nuclear threat. As we continue to live in the nuclear age, the possibility of a nuclear war or a dirty bomb attack is always going to be there. Knowing what to do before, during, and after a radioactive attack is very important to ensure you and your family's survival. Cyber warfare is another immediate threat that we need to keep an eye on and prepare for. It's not just about losing our internet connection or getting our credit card details stolen. Terrorist attacks could target critical infrastructures like power grids or water treatment facilities and cripple our nation. So being prepared for these eventualities is crucial. The last man-made threat discussed that could be a huge problem is artificial intelligence. Though many consider this a threat in the future, the reality is that AI is already here, and it is already starting to threaten certain livelihoods through automation. But the most dangerous threat is when AI becomes smarter than even the brightest humans on this planet. When this happens, it's not hard to see AI not wanting to be controlled by humans and overruling any commands given to it. As with all of the top 10 threats discussed, there's likely a video I've already recorded on this channel, so we have only really scratched the surface here. I encourage you to check out some of the other videos on my channel that deal with many of these subject matters. The goal of this two-part video series is not to cause fear, but to provide information on what is likely to happen. And hopefully this will help you make the proper preparations, increase your chances of not only surviving but thriving in the future. If you found this video useful, please click on the like button, share on social media, and provide feedback in the comments section. As always, be safe out there.